Hey guys, welcome back to When Geeks Craft. I'm Nicole, and today we're going to be making a Dwemer ruin-inspired book Nook from Skyrim. Now I'm about 10 years late to the world of Skyrim. I would consider myself a backseat gamer because I didn't really care to learn how to play them myself. That changed after I invested about 1,000 hours of my life into Breath of the Wild, and now I just kind of want to play all the games. Skyrim is one of those games that Turi really wanted me to play, so I watched every Doug video about Skyrim and dove right in.
How many bears does it take to kill heaven? Weapons! Oh god!
Immediately after entering my first Dwemer ruin, I knew this needed to be the first book Nook I made. I mean, look at this weird chair! Using some of my reference photos and some general knowledge about book Nook sizes, I designed a finger-jointed box as well as some key feature items like furniture and the doors. I laser cut all those pieces out and started assembling the doors with some super glue and tiny clamps. I made sure all of my finger joints worked the way I planned because thinking in 3D is not really my strong suit. I marked the pieces so I could really remember exactly what the heck I was doing over time. Now I had a box and a set of doors. It was finally time for a plan. Dwemer ruins are very stony with bold bronze accents. I wanted the back to be symmetrical, so I opted for 5 sections knowing that 2 of them would have some of those bold bronze details. I wanted to keep the stony walls themselves pretty simple though, because they really weren't the main focal point. I needed to get my design from this piece of paper to the foam, so I opted to transfer it using a clay carving tool where I just traced onto the foam. After that, I removed the paper and carved those lines in a little deeper, and then I glued the Dollar Tree foam core to the back panel. For the sake of brevity, I repeated this exact same process on the left and right sides. For the top, I opted for a simple square pattern because no one was going to see this. For the floor, I used some reference images of this swirl pattern that shows up everywhere and improvised some patterns around the border of the floor. Now, to try something I haven't really ever attempted before. Clay. I knew I wanted a weird 3D shape, and instead of 3D printing it, because fusion is hard, I decided, hey, I could probably do that in clay. I'm not sold that I did a very good job, but basically I made a sheet and added layer after layer to make the back bronze details. I got in the rhythm of placing down a snake and smooshing it into the weird shape I was mimicking from the reference images. I learned from North of the Border on YouTube that isopropyl alcohol would remove fingerprints, so I used that a lot. I also baked the pieces after every second or third added rib because I was afraid of messing it all up. I bet over time I'll be more comfortable with my clay modeling, but this was scary and new and I just kept baking it over and over again. Eventually, I got this thing. I had to do some quick surgery to the pieces to make sure that they would fit into the back area where I wanted them to go. But then after that, it fit well. Because I had such a fantastic experience making the one small clay piece, I figured I would just mold it because I would never be able to recreate the same shape again. So we just moved to a different state, and I brought all of our mold making materials with us. I wasn't sure if our umu material was still viable. Turns out, it wasn't. So I had to throw all that away and pull out the Plat 10 from Alumilite. After I removed the master from the mold, it was time to pour the plastic. For this I used Smoothcast 300 from Smooth On. It's a 2-part liquid plastic that turns white after it cures in about 10 minutes. I repeated this process twice. I glued the 2 pieces into the back panel and moved on to the final bits of detail work. Once the back panel was finished, I grabbed a foil ball and started to add random texture. I decided that the depressions that I made originally weren't dramatic enough, so I used my hobby knife to make those seam lines a little bit deeper, and then came back with that same clay carving tool I used originally. This actually helped a lot more than I anticipated and made the lines way more dramatic. Because gluing the foam pieces to the interior of the box creates additional thickness, that allowed for the finger joints to not work. So I had to cut about 1/8 of an inch off of where all the finger joints connected, because obviously it wouldn't work unless I did that. Thinking in 3D is not my strong suit, but shaping foam is. So, you take the good with the bad and you just adjust along the way. Another fun thing I learned thanks to the YouTube gods recommending a channel called Studsin Studios to me is that modeling paste makes for excellent rock texture once you water it down a smidge. So I glooped that schloop all over the rocks. When the rock wall was done hardening, I used some of my pre-mixed Mod Podge to seal in all that nice rock texture. Now it was time to paint. I started with a light gray paint from Vallejo and I dry brushed that on everything that was stone. When the gray paint was applied and dried, I masked off the clay pieces and painted them a mixture of gold and bronze. These same two colors will be repeated many, many times within this project. I used a series of different washes to make all the stone areas have the same grimy hue. I would start with a light wash, which has a light brown tint to it. I dabbed off the excess and then came back with a stronger tone wash in all the little nooks and crannies. This especially helped on the floor tiles. It was finally time to glue most of the pieces together. I decided to glue all but the top and the front together since I still had to finish the front and I wanted to have easy access without the top in the way. Next up was the doors. I started by giving them a coat of black primer, then I mixed up some of that modeling paste with a bit of gold paint and water to texture the doors. These doors needed to resemble a hammered bronze door, so the texture actually really did do the trick. I needed rivets, so I went to the hobby store and found these really small pearl rhinestones. These pearls were all on one sheet of adhesive though, so I had to cut them out without removing them from their adhesive backing. Let's just say, this took a little bit of time. Once all the rhinestones were in place, I was able to paint the doors with that signature goldy, bronzy color and give them a good grime wash. After the doors were nice and grody, I attached them to the front using tiny, tiny, tiny hinges. I locked them in place using super glue, and off camera I hammered in the nails. These hinges were great, but the fact that I was super gluing them to a painted surface didn't really work that well. If I were to do this again, I would have attached them before painting the doors, but you live and you learn. Now it's time to flip the doors over and add detail to the back. To make the doors shut better, I cut back bits where the two doors were touching in the middle. I laser cut the same door pattern out of cheap hobby veneer wood and super glued that in place. I then followed the same painting steps I did for the front of the doors. Finally, it was time to come up with a plan for the front. This entire project was really just testing me to make up patterns on the fly. It was really out of the norm for me and pretty fun. I found a reference image of a door from the game and just kind of went with it. I didn't want the front to be too busy because the doors were likely going to be open most of the time. So I opted for a more simple, flat looking front. To save time, and because I've done the same process over and over again, I decided to mix my black Mod Podge with the modeling paste to speckle and seal in one go. When that was done, I painted everything again with that goldy bronze, with the exception of the bottom area, which I painted to look like stone. Next up was the furniture. I employed Turi's help pulling the 3D files from the game for some specific pieces I didn't want to try to make by hand. I'll put a link in the description below for directions on how to access these files, but since it requires owning the game, I will not be providing the 3D files on Patreon or Thingiverse. There were some pieces that I opted to laser cut because the 3D files weren't really optimized for 3D printing. These pieces also went through a lot of iterations. I had so many chairs printed out by the end of this video. All the laser cut pieces will be available on Patreon, and they will be optimized to work the first time. Hopefully. I just play a professional on the internet. Sorry guys. I coated all the 3D printed pieces in a modeling paste to give them texture, and to hide the layer lines. When the texture was dry, I started to prime all the pieces and then painted them either stone to match the walls or the gold bronze to match the accents. I used the same dry brushing colors and washes used on everything else, because if you look in the game, everything matches. It's either stone or bronze. When I was at the hobby store, they had some silverware as well as some books. I purchased both and painted the silverware bronze and gave all the books a light tone wash. I purposely wanted the books to look ratty, so I coated them in the wash and damaged most of the pages. Now it was gluing time. I glued all the books and bowls to the shelving unit, and then glued the place settings down to the table. All the furniture pieces were also glued into the model itself, so the entire thing could be moved without shifting. Time again to get Turi's help. I needed a light installed in the ceiling. He had me pre-drill a hole and prep the cords for him. Then he soldered the lights together for me. We used 4 LED lights and put a green film over them to have a green glow. While Turi was working on the lights, I started painting the sides of the boxes with black 3.0. I really wanted this to blend into the bookshelf, so I wanted any panels that were visible to be barely visible. The wires were fed up through the hole in the ceiling, and I ran the wires down through the back. I hot snotted the pieces on the back and made a really crappy switch holder, which works just enough for me to not want to change it. In the future, I'd like to plan ahead for the electronic stuff a little bit better, but this was my first try. After everything was done, it was time to attach the front. I needed to remove some of the floor to account for the doors, but after I removed that, I painted it with black 3.0 to hide my crimes. Now it's time for the final shots. I want to give a huge shout out to all of our Patreon members, especially our super fans. $2 a month gives you access to every file from any one of our videos. $5 a month gets your name in the videos and a very special place in my heart. Links to our Patreon, materials used in this video, and instructions for how to access those Skyrim 3D files will be in the description below. Thanks for watching everyone, and see you guys next time.